Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with another Craft of Exile video. In this one, we're going to talk about the meta Minion shield, which can look like this as an example. There's a couple of different outcomes of this, and I'll go through a low-budget version as well as a high-budget version of how to craft this meta Minion shield for spectre builds, but also for many other Minion builds. And I'll explain the crafting processes, but we're going to have a small TLDR version of it first, and then I'll talk about the low-budget version and then the high-budget version. The TLDR is very simple. You get a intelligence-based shield with the highest percent block chance. In this case, you could use a titanium spirit shield. You will then have one of Crusader, one of Redeemer. You will alteration craft both or buy them with the +2 minimum frenzy or power charges. You have one of each. Make sure those are the only influence modifiers. Then you will woke them together and pray the suffix is open. Now you have two choices if the suffix is blocked. Either do a best you craft to open the suffix or annul it and pray, or just sell it and repeat the crafting process and pray the suffix is open. Once the suffix is open, you want to bench block all the, or you want to block all the prefixes with normal modifiers by bench blocking the suffix and then just smacking a couple of exalted orbs so that the prefixes are filled. Once the prefixes are filled, you will then do an Ashling tier 4 craft on it to get the veiled double damage. If you don't, then repeat the entire process. Rinse, repeat till you have the suffixes sorted. Once you have the suffixes sorted, you can do suffix that can't be changed, benchcraft, metacraft, and then do Reforge Cold till you have a decent cold damage, and pray you get some other modifiers, which I'll explain further down the road. But that's the TLDR. So how do you craft this? We're going to start off with telling you guys that we have plenty of crafting videos. And in these, you can just see the links in the descriptions below, which goes through crafting 101 for those of you just getting started and learning how to craft. And basically, there's a video for that. There's a written crafting guides for generic crafting processes of very generic items that you can go through. There's also some advanced crafting processes that we're working on. And right now, we're doing this version here, which I'll also include a written version of in the coming days. So how do you then craft this as a low budget start? Well, I'm going to show you this by taking an emulator and going in Craft of Exile, creating a new item, and then showing this in offhand shield intelligence. We'll just take a titanium spirit shield, and what you're gonna do is, like I mentioned before, first step is to get yourself a Redeemer and a Crusader titanium spirit shield. One of the best ways to do this is to check Craft of Exile, then look at the item level modifiers for the stats that you want. So first off, if we're looking at this, and taking in the Crusader as well as the Redeemer, you can see that the mods that we do want for a perfect one would be increased cold damage, which is item level 84 for the highest tier. We also want frenzy charges, which requires level 80, and power charges requires item level 80. And then you have on the damage per block chance, if you want to do a perfect one, requires 68, and chaos. Coldest extra chaos is requiring item level 80. So now we can verify that the highest item level that we need to get the perfect mods would be item level 84. Now, knowing this, we can then search for a titanium spirit shield on the PoE trade. We can then tell you that we want 84. And then we can do a count of one of either a Crusader influence or a Redeemer influence. And now we can see that these shields are going for 1 chaos. 10, well, that's a price fixer, so 10 chaos is the base shield. Now, once you've done this, you don't have the actual mod that you want, so these are Redeemer shields for 10 chaos. You will then have to scour it and alteration craft it till you get the Redeemer, in this case being Frenzy Charges tier 2. And if you look at this version of doing this and taking away the Crusader, you can see that that's going to cost you about 64 chaos to alteration craft averagely. Sometimes you can be unlucky and spend a bit more. Now, once you have a shield with a +2 frenzy charges in this scenario, you have to make sure that there are no other influence modifiers. So if you do this, and this is a suffix craft, and there is an influence prefix, you have to get rid of the prefix influence. Otherwise, your woke orb is not going to work that well. So once you've done this, we no longer need to care what base shield or item level this has. However, we have 2 frenzy charges. What we do need now is minimum power charges that are also 2. And we need this on a shield, and it cannot be a unique, so any non-unique. So you do this type of search, which allows you to see that you can buy any of these. However, again, it's very important to make sure that you don't get 2 influence modifiers. So looking at this one, you can see that there's a Crusader roll there. Thorny, Whelping, Prism, Nautilus, Serrated. This shield would work, 5 chaos. This shield here has a Crusader, that would work. Let's see if I can find someone that has 2 Crusader rolls. to show you what it looks if it's an incorrect version. This one here has Chris chances for spells, Havoc, Resolute, and there's a +2 to maximum lightning resistance. That's a Crusader's roll. So this one will not work because you can only have the +2 minimum power charges as the influence modifier. So if you buy one of these shields, what you then happens is that you take one shield that has the minimum power charges, in this case being the bad base. You use an Awakener's Orb on that one, and then you put it on the Titanium Spirit Shield, so you actually end up with a base like this. Now, once you have that, you'll be in a position where it looks like this, and then we go to minimum. So now the shield looks like this as an example. I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see. When a shield looks like this, you have the correct base, you have the correct influences, you have the correct influence modifiers on the suffixes, but in this case, we have a suffix modifier that we do not want. Not bad. Not good at all. Not good. So in this case, we have an option. Now, we have a couple of options. For a low-budget version, you have two decisions to make. One, sell this and do everything again. You'll lose a little bit of currency in the long run, but this would work. The other version is to try to open that suffix slot, because we want to keep these two, but we want to open this one up. And the way to do that, the smoothest, is two different choices. Either an Orb of Annulment removes a random modifier, which is very likely to cut everything else off that you don't want it to remove. The other option is using Beast Crafting, and then removing a suffix, adding a new prefix, and doing this. Now, in this case, I hit it and was lucky. And if you're unlucky, it will look like this and will take away one of your charges. And again, this is a bricked shield. You can just vendor it and do it again, which is expensive. So for low budget, I would recommend just keeping it the way it is, and then benchcraft anything that will give you damage. So in this case, I would benchcraft cold damage as extra chaos, and then just call it a day and just keep it like that, and not waste more currency on it. And that would be the low budget version. Personally, I would prefer to use the Victorious Charity for low budget over doing this, and I would only do this process for high budget myself. So moving over to the high budget version of crafting this shield. First off, we have to get rid of this suffix modifier. And when the shield looks like this, it is very, very simple. We now need to make sure that we get a double damage. Now, in a low budget version, if this happens, you would just benchcraft the double damage as a suffix craft. However, in a high budget version, we are looking into doing a veiled modifier for chaos for double damage. This is not guaranteed and therefore can be very expensive. The first thing we need to do would be to benchcraft any type of blocking. So what I do is I smack up a cheap tier 3 cold rust, for example, or any resistances. So what we would do in this process is that we would now fill up the prefixes. And why we're filling up the prefixes is because we want to use an Ashling tier 4. I'll explain that in a second. So filling up the prefixes is very simple. It's going to cost you an Exalted Orb. And if you have less prefixes, let's say the item looks like this, and there's only one prefix, well, I'd have to use 2 Exalteds. And these modifiers, we don't care about these. We just want to fill up the prefixes. Then we would remove the benchcraft. And at this point, we would use an Ashling tier 4. Now, an Ashling tier 4 requires Ashling to be in research on the betrayal encounters. She also needs to be level 3, and then you need to kill Katarina. And by killing Katarina, all the betrayal guys on the board will be level 4 or one level higher. So in this case, we have an open suffix, and the only thing that can happen from the Ashling would be to give a veiled suffix modifier. So we do an Ashling veil like this, and we'll be having a veiled suffix modifier. The problem with this is that it is not guaranteed to give us the double damage. So if I then, how do I unveil it again? Oh, there, I'm blind. So once we unveil this modifier, you have to keep in mind, you can only remove this craft before you unveil it. After you've unveiled it, it becomes an actual modifier and cannot be unveiled, or cannot be removed through the bench status. So by clicking unveil, we now have a chance to deal damage while focused, which will not work. We have strength, dexterity, and cold and chaos resistance. This means that the shield is bricked. The only option we have now would be to annul it and pray that we, get rid of this shit. And rinse, repeat the entire process. This is why the high budget version of this type of crafting is very expensive. So basically, you will repeat this process all the way till you get a chance to deal double damage. Once you have double damage sorted, your suffixes is now complete. However, we need to open up the prefixes to keep working on this. It just gets better and better, right? This is the easy process, but it's still very expensive. So what you do now is you go to harvest crafting and you do a reforges while keeping suffix craft. These are going for about an exalted on TFT right now. So reforge a rare item whilst keeping all suffixes. We'll keep all of these three and reforge the prefixes. And as you can see, we now have open prefix. We have a shit roll that we don't give a shit about. Now, the process is very simple. You will do a benchcraft's prefix, which is suffixes cannot be changed. This costs 2 exalteds, if I recall correctly. And now that we have this, we will then go back to harvest crafting, and we will do a reroll plus. In the reroll plus, we are looking for a guarantee modifier, and also more common. And the reason we're doing this is for 2 different versions, but you could just do the reroll as well. It doesn't really matter. I like the reroll plus with a reforged cold. What then happens is that the item will reforge entirely, but the suffixes won't be touched because of the benchcraft, and it will guarantee a cold modifier and make other cold modifiers more common. For a reason for this is because there's 2 different cold modifiers that we want to look at. One is just increased cold damage. The other one is, as you can see here, and I do a search, we can see increased cold damage. We have increased cold damage to spells, which we don't want, but we do mind having a high tier of cold damage as extra chaos. So by doing this craft, you can see here that now we got level of all cold skills. If this happens, you will rinse, repeat the process of putting the suffix that can't be changed, which is another 2 exalteds, then back to harvest to put this on. And in this case, we have tier 6 cold damage. You will just rinse, repeat this process till your heart's content. And what you're looking for is modifiers that you are happy with keeping. Now, as an example, if you look at the shield that I have 27% cold damage on mine, but I have 10% of cold as extra chaos, and I just benched in some flat damage on it. And I said, you know what, I'm going to keep that. So basically, this process is all about stopping whenever you're happy with it. For example, here, this is not optimal, but it's a pretty decent outcome. And you can rinse, repeat this process with as much currency as you feel comfortable wasting on this. Oh my god. I got a tier 1. Hitting tier 1 is ridiculously low chance to do. Ridiculously low. So it's very, very hard to hit that. So basically you do this process. So let's say we ended up with a tier 5 cold damage. There are prefix slots open. At this point, you have a couple of different versions. You could do an augment influence mod, which is going for like 10 to 15x right now. Very, very expensive. To try and hope for the fact that you might get a... let's see if we can find it. It is an influence modifier here. Increased damage per 1% chance to block attack damage. And since the shield has... doesn't show there. The shield has a 25% chance to block. It will give you 25% increased damage. So you can do that if you want to. It's very expensive. But in this case, I would literally just bench a cold damage as extra chaos, as high tier as I can, and I get up to 8% of cold as extra chaos, and this would be a finished product. So again, to just recap what we did with the high budget version, we walked over the charges, we then open up the suffix, and if that failed, repeat the process. Once we've opened up the suffix, we would fill up the prefixes, we would then do a tier 4 ashling to get the double damage. If that failed, try to open it. If that failed, repeat the entire process from the start again. And if then once you finally get the double damage, the item is done with the suffixes. And then you would use harvest reforging whilst keeping all the suffixes to open up a prefix slot. Now, after that, you will bench block the shield with the suffixes cannot be changed, and then reforge with the harvest with the cold modifiers till you get a decent amount of cold damage and or the coldest extra chaos. And then benchcraft the coldest extra chaos if you can. If not, you can just benchcraft some flat damages and then go from there. And that's basically the entire process of crafting this. If you get lucky, you get a very high tier cold damage. If not, you just settle with whatever you feel comfortable with, depending on how much currency you're willing to invest into this. It is a very expensive craft to achieve this, but that's the process of how to do it. Hope you guys had use of this video. I will have a written guide version for this, for those of you who think that I'm speaking too fast. Don't want to keep this video too long. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe for more content. Until next time, boys, stay safe and keep rocking.